Today, our speaker is Dr. Arif Jetha. He's a scientist at the Institute for Work and Health and an assistant professor at the University of Toronto's Dalla Lana School of Public Health. Arif earned his PhD in behavioral sciences and public health from U of T, and he has an MSc in health community and development from the London School of Economics and Political Science. His program of research aims at understanding how the future of work will affect the employment participation of people living with chronic disabling conditions across the life course. And today he's going to talk to us about fragmentation in the future of work, exploring the impact of the changing nature of work on vulnerable workers. So I will turn it over to you, Arif, and then I'll come back on at the end of the presentation. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Monique. And thank you to everyone who's tuning in today. I am really excited to be presenting this work because it's actually one of the first studies in a large program of research that aims to examine the implications of the future of work for groups of workers who have faced disadvantage in the labor market. And before I start, I wanted to just quickly acknowledge our funder. And so this study was funded by a New Frontiers and Research Fund grant. And the New Frontiers program is a joint initiative of Canada's three main funding bodies. And what's really unique about this funding program was that it aimed to support high risk, high reward, and interdisciplinary research. And the goal is to inspire projects that bring disciplines together, so a very multidisciplinary perspective. And what was also really interesting was that it funded research that might fail, but has the potential for significant impact. And so this grant opportunity really enabled our team to ask creative research questions and explore the use of novel methodologies that we may not have examined in the past. I'd also really like to acknowledge our multidisciplinary research team, with subject matter experts in the fields of public health, industrial and organizational psychology, economics, strategic foresight, medicine, and social psychology. And really having this multidisciplinary team really brought richness to the interpretation of the findings. The research that I'm going to be presenting on today is currently under peer review. However, there is an open access preprint available, and I'd be happy to share it to those who may be interested in reading more about this work. Also of note, the research that I'm presenting is a foundational evidence synthesis that has informed several other studies that are in the pipeline. So there's definitely more to come from our research team on this topic. And so just in case you stop paying attention to this presentation, I thought I would highlight some of the key take-home messages. So I think first and foremost, using a comprehensive horizon scan methodology, we uncovered 9 interrelated medium to long-term trends that characterize the future of work and have significant implications for groups of workers who have traditionally faced vulnerability. And a synthesis of these trends showed that some workers are more likely to enter the future of work at a position of disadvantage and may experience inequities as these trends are realized. And lastly, the future of work is associated with a number of opportunities, so it's not all doom and gloom. However, vulnerable workers may be more likely to experience barriers to accessing these opportunities. So I thought I would start by defining the future of work. And so in defining this concept, I draw from multiple perspectives. And pretty much the future of work can be defined as the large scale and rapid digitization and automation of diverse domains of working life. But it's not just about technology. The future of work also considers social, demographic, political, and environmental changes. And what's important here is that many scholars believe that the future of work reflects a dramatic change to every industry and the transformation of all aspects of work, including the ways we work, where we work. And what's also important to note is that the future of work is superimposed on top of ongoing industrial shifts, like a shift from manufacturing to more knowledge-based sectors in Canada, as well as growth in offshoring of work, as well as growth in non-standard work arrangements in countries like Canada. I also wanted to highlight that there's been a huge amount of international and local research, both within research organizations and through academia, that have studied different aspects of the future of work over the last decade. And that scholarship has really paved the way in our understanding of the potential changes to the working world. But what's often missing from these studies is the experience of diverse groups of workers, especially those who may experience disadvantage within the labor market. Also, existing research on the future of work does not fully acknowledge the health and social inequities that can be associated with potential changes to the nature of work. And really, these are gaps that our team at the Institute for Work and Health aims at filling. And so I think one thing I wanted to point out is that when we started, our goal was actually to focus on the implications of the future of work for young workers and people with disabilities, two groups that I study quite closely. And while this is still a focus of our research, what we realized is that this topic of the future of work is still in its infancy. And so in our evidence synthesis that I'll present today, we decided to examine the impact of the future of work more broadly on diverse workers experiencing vulnerability. And so drawing from scholarship at the Institute for Work and Health and elsewhere, we define vulnerability according to the conditions to which a person is exposed. This can include being exposed to adverse and unsafe work conditions, having a lack of access to employment legislation or statutory benefits, having a lack of opportunities to improve one's working conditions, and maybe even earning lower wages or experiencing employment instability. And some research suggests that up to 1/3 of Canadian workers experience some form of vulnerability. And while we don't want to paint a broad brush, population level data suggests that certain labor market subgroups are more likely to experience vulnerability when compared to others. And these are the workers that may also be most at risk or most likely to experience challenges in the future of work. So as noted, the future of work has been studied quite a bit, and oftentimes this is through the lens of economics or through the lens of labor market specialists. And I think one thing that it's really important to highlight is that the future of work also has considerable public health implications. And so decades of research shows that being employed, the quality of work, and one's working conditions can directly or indirectly relate to physical and mental health. On the other end of this relationship, one's health can also determine one's ability to fully participate in the labor market. And so the future of work has the potential to dramatically disrupt all aspects of the working world and as a result, impact this work and health interface. And just very lastly, before we get into the research, I think it's important to look to previous changes as a roadmap for how the future of work could impact the employment of vulnerable groups. For instance, past periods of technological change, as well as past periods of recession, have resulted in the displacement of jobs, contributed to income polarization, as well as an erosion of standard and secure work opportunities. And oftentimes, groups experiencing vulnerable conditions were most affected. What is more, studies during these periods also show a decline in mental and physical health at the population level. More recently, the automation of work has also had an adverse effect on the most vulnerable workers in the labor market. I think what's important to note is that compared to past examples, changes to the future of work are occurring at a faster pace, and they're disrupting a greater number of industries and occupations, highlighting the potential for more significant health and social inequities. So with that in mind, our research sought to address two core research objectives. The first, we want to identify existing evidence on different trends that may span social, technological, economic, environmental, and political domains, and that characterize the future of work. We also want to synthesize and describe how the convergence of these trends that we identified might impact vulnerability within the labor market. So how did we do that? Well, we conducted a pretty comprehensive horizon scan. And for those who are unfamiliar, a horizon scan is often used in the field of strategic foresight, and it aims at conducting a systematic identification of trends that have the potential to emerge over time. A horizon scan is inclusive and seeks to identify and synthesize diverse evidence sources. We started this process by first identifying 5 core documents as a research team. And using those 5 core documents, we developed an initial pool of search terms that spanned different future of work trends, that spanned vulnerability search terms, as well as different work outcomes search terms. And then as we started to identify more and more research, we iteratively identified new search terms that we then plugged into our search process. And to note, our search was conducted between December and January of 2020, and then we updated it again in August to capture the potential impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. And so our scan was actually conducted in 2 phases. First, searches were conducted using databases which contain both gray and peer-reviewed literature. Second, we conducted a comprehensive Twitter search to identify resources with moderate to high levels of engagement. We then carried out an eligibility screen to identify articles that we aimed to synthesize. And to be eligible, articles had to be in English language, published after 2015, documented a potential future of work trend, focused on an industrialized context, and described an explicit impact on vulnerability. Next, we reviewed and synthesized relevant articles, and in doing so, we summarized the future of work trend that the article captured, how that trend contributed to vulnerability, and whether specific groups of workers could be affected. Articles were then categorized according to common themes to develop macro trends. And one thing I did want to note is that we did identify weak signals, and these were aspects of the future of work which could have implications for vulnerable workers, but the impact was a bit fuzzy. And so for this study, we decided not to include those weak signals, but we hope to better understand them in upcoming steps in our research process. And so just a very quick overview, we obtained a ton of literature, close to 5,000 articles, and we fully reviewed and synthesized close to 1,600 articles that met eligibility criteria. So as you can imagine, this was quite a significant undertaking. Overall, we identified 9 key trends from technological, social, political, and environmental domains of life. And these trends were interrelated and could individually and collectively contribute to conditions of vulnerability in the future of work. Also of note, not one specific group of workers was consistently identified in the literature as being likely to experience disadvantage in the future of work. So in the following slides, I'm going to briefly walk you through each trend. And given the time constraints of this talk, I'm going to focus more on how aspects of each trend could relate to vulnerability for workers. All right, so let's dive in. So the first and most prominent trend we identified was related to the digital transformation of the economy. And our scan indicated that the advancement and adoption of a large number of digital technologies are expected to substantially impact the nature of work. And examples of technology that we identified in our scan, which could significantly change work, included the Internet of Things, smart sensors, cloud computing, 5G technology, virtual reality, as well as blockchain technology, to name a few. And obviously, these are diverse technologies, but our synthesis revealed that they could impact vulnerability in similar ways. First, workers in routine or low-skilled jobs could be partially or fully displaced by the application of these different technologies, which could take on the performance of a greater number of job tasks. Also, technologies such as virtual reality or augmented reality could contribute to more complex jobs being performed by workers in other contexts. Literature described a situation where job tasks are also more likely to be parceled out and contracted to workers through the use of digital platforms. As a result, the digital transformation of the economy could increase competition for limited full-time and permanent jobs. Also, the growing application of digital technologies could mean that workers might be forced into more precarious types of jobs or jobs that are unsafe. At the same time, digital technologies have definitely driven the development of new work opportunities. 10 years ago, no one would have thought that being a drone technician was considered an in-demand occupation, but it continues to grow in demand. Also, digital technologies could increase efficiencies that could be beneficial to all workers. Studies we identified also described that the digital transformation of the economy could contribute to more accessible work environments where there may be greater flexibility in the ways work is performed. An example of this is using telecommunication software for work from home arrangements. While the gig economy seen in a negative light for some workers, it could also be an entry point into the labor market. So definitely some pros and cons related to the digital transformation of the economy. Similarly, a large body of research we uncovered focused on the application of artificial intelligence and machine learning systems within the workplace, and this represented our second core trend. AI systems can replicate human intelligence and behaviors within the work environment. And literature we identified indicated that AI applications may advance the automation of job tasks. An example is an advanced chatbot customer service representative, which can interpret customer questions and generate responses, or algorithmic stock trading platforms, which may make financial decisions according to changes in the market. Also, the application of AI to work could create new conditions where humans and machines would be required to work hand in hand. And similar to the digital transformation of the economy, the application of AI has the potential to contribute to vulnerability in several ways. In the short term, AI applications could be applied to facilitate the automation of low-skilled jobs, resulting in this displacement of some workers. Also, advancements in machine learning could result in the automation of more predictive job tasks, with workers in professional jobs also being affected. The result could be a situation where some groups of workers may be passed over for a limited number of professional jobs. The wide application of AI could mean that the available entry-level jobs are those that have a greater number of physical demands and could be those that are more strenuous and unpredictable. These types of jobs may be less likely to be performed by machines. An example could be care aides in long-term care settings. At the same time, the application of AI to the workplace could result in the creation of new job opportunities. Also, the human-AI interface could also mean that jobs could be performed with greater accuracy, which may improve the ways that work is performed. Also, workers with emotional intelligence, which cannot be replaced by AI systems at this time, could be in demand by employers. And this could be beneficial for workers from diverse groups who have different lived experience. A third trend centered on a more specialized application of AI, which is the application of AI to management systems. And our synthesis revealed that AI is being integrated into a growing number of human resource management systems, including job applicant tracking, job matching selection software, and performance management systems, which intend on making fairer HR decisions. However, algorithms used to inform the initial parameters of these HR systems have the potential to reinforce existing social conditions within a workplace. For some groups, HR systems using artificial intelligence could inadvertently bias against workers who may not fit a predetermined mold, or may discriminate against workers who may look or act differently. The result could be exclusion from work opportunities or being excluded from advancement opportunities. At the same time, if programmed appropriately, AI-enabled management systems could potentially level the playing field by making HR decisions based on objective metrics like job experience or output rather than objective evaluations of a worker. Related to the digital transformation of the economy and increasing application of AI within workplaces, a body of literature in our review indicated that the future of work is a period where new jobs will be created. And many of these jobs will require specialized skills, including technical competency, digital literacy, as well as soft skills. And our scan highlighted that some groups of workers may be more likely to possess lower levels of educational attainment and are less likely to possess STEM training when compared to population averages. And these educational gaps may pose challenges to obtaining jobs of the future and meeting employer needs. Moreover, studies in our scan suggested that some groups of workers report barriers to receiving on-the-job training or developing new skills outside of work. And these challenges faced by some vulnerable groups may exacerbate a skills gap. At the same time, the requirement for workers with specialized skills may mean that companies could broaden their hiring to groups of previously overlooked workers. Also, our synthesis revealed that workers with diverse lived experience and soft skills could also be an asset for workers, opening up new opportunities. A proportion of studies we identified in our scan described the impact of digital technologies as a catalyst for the global exchange of ideas, services, and goods in both physical and virtual spaces, which has been referred to as Globalization 4.0. This is our fifth trend and a term we borrow from the World Economic Forum. And so the intersection between digital technologies and globalization has contributed to telemigration, where growing numbers of white-collar jobs can now be performed remotely by workers who are geographically distant using advanced collaboration tools. Also, studies in our scan describe growing online marketplaces of freelancers who can bid for work and take on employment from any country. Indeed, globalization can contribute to vulnerability in several ways. Some workers can be employed in jobs that are at risk of being offshored. Changes to the structure of globalization can mean that fewer jobs are available within local contexts, and there could be an increase in competition for a limited number of domestic jobs. And also something important to note that within other contexts, workers could face worsening conditions, creating vulnerability in other settings. Based on the literature we synthesized, the concept of Globalization 4.0 has focused attention towards the development of policies that aim at addressing income inequality domestically and across the globe. Yet, these policies and programs have not been completely realized. Another important trend that we highlighted was related to a changing climate and extreme weather events, which have the potential to disrupt economic activity and impact the conditions with which people work. However, in synthesizing literature, we also note that new jobs may also emerge, which are designed to address the effects of climate change. And so our synthesis showed that some groups of workers may be more likely to be at disadvantage by climate change. For instance, climate change may mean that workers whose jobs are outdoors may have to work in warmer temperatures or have their jobs interrupted by an extreme weather event. For example, workers in the agricultural settings could be particularly susceptible to climate change, especially when they have little say over their working conditions. Some groups of workers may have less access to social safety nets that can be protective during a climate crisis and potentially reinforce potential health and social impacts. And while new jobs are anticipated to emerge in a green economy, which is definitely a positive, studies that we synthesized indicated that some groups of workers may experience barriers to obtaining these new jobs. One primarily positive shift that we identified in our review was the impact of a growing proportion of Gen Z workers in the labor market. This is our seventh key trend. Of note, studies highlighted that Gen Zs are the most racially diverse generation in the workforce. Also, their employment perceptions and preferences have been shaped by past periods of economic crises and technological advancement. Growing numbers of Gen Z workers could mean that there is a greater push for employers to adopt organizational policies and practices that increase accessibility and inclusion. Also, Gen Zs could encourage the adoption of organizational policies that promote work-life balance or further facilitate work-from-home arrangements. Literature that we found also described that Gen Zs are digital natives. They're born into a world where smart technology is commonplace. As a result, Gen Zs may be more likely to realize the importance of on-the-job training and push their employers for upskilling opportunities. Interestingly, our scan highlighted that a growth of populist values within industrialized countries could also be a defining feature of the future of work, and this was our 8th trend. Broadly speaking, populism can refer to the rejection of establishments, elites, and expertise by a community of people. Populist sentiments can also grow from a frustration and anxiety about the future. And in these situations, some groups of workers may be seen as scapegoats in response to that level of frustration and anxiety. Some literature we identified describes that the growth in populist values has also been tied to globalization, as well as the automation of work, trends that we identified earlier in our scan. Of concern, populist values within industrialized countries can contribute to discrimination of workers according to their personal characteristics. In a situation where populism grows, some workers could experience exclusion from the labor market altogether. As well, the growth in populist sentiments could result in the push to implement more restrictive labor market policies, which could then further alienate certain workers from the workforce. And so lastly, within the context of the COVID-19 pandemic, our Horizon scan highlighted the potential for diverse external shocks to significantly disrupt and reshape the nature of work. External shocks can include an economic recession, a natural disaster, or what we're currently undergoing, a global pandemic. Studies we identified in our review highlighted that these forces can speed up the pace of change to the nature of work, as well as speed up the technological adoption that is occurring within workplaces. Using the COVID-19 pandemic as an example, the literature we synthesized indicated that workers experiencing vulnerable conditions could be at a greater risk of displacement from an external shock. Vulnerable groups may also be more likely to report that their work conditions change and become more precarious or unsafe as a result of an external shock. Also, an external shock like the COVID-19 pandemic may encourage workplaces to invest more in the adoption of digital technologies that facilitate the automation of work and further contribute to the displacement of workers. The research we synthesized also showed that external shocks like the COVID-19 pandemic and periods of recession can result in fear as well as anxiety regarding the future of work, as well as growth in populist sentiment. So definitely some more interrelationships that we saw when we examined this trend. At the same time, external shocks can also drive innovation. For instance, in the case of COVID-19, employers who quickly adopted virtual collaboration softwares, which enabled workers to have more flexibility in the performance of their jobs and enabled many of us to work from home. However, it's important to note that the benefits of innovation in the case of an external shock like COVID-19 may not be accessible to all people, highlighting another potential source of inequity. And so I think there's several key discussion points that are worth noting from this comprehensive scan of literature. Importantly, the future of work is going to be fragmented, or is anticipated to be fragmented, and as a result has the potential to contribute to health and social inequities that are tied to employment. And so anticipating these changes will enable us to better develop policies and programs that can protect the most vulnerable labor market groups. Also, some groups of workers may enter the future of work at a position of disadvantage and lack resources that may be beneficial to obtaining jobs of the future. Also, some workers may also be more likely to work in jobs with work conditions that are susceptible to displacement in the future. These workers require additional support as the future of work continues to be realized. One thing that we really highlighted, or we noted in our scan, was that the future of work is made up of a system of trends that are interrelated, and changes to different aspects of the future of work may reciprocally drive another aspect. Accordingly, conceptualizing the future of work as a complex system can enable us to better understand the sum of its individual parts and the interrelationships. Furthermore, unexpected external shocks may contribute to an acceleration of change and may exacerbate inequalities within the working population. Policies and programs for vulnerable workers should aim at building resilience to these sudden events. And lastly, the future of work is associated with opportunities, including the creation of new jobs, increased accessibility, and values placed towards workers with diverse experiences. However, it's unclear to what extent future of work opportunities will be available to different groups of workers who have traditionally experienced vulnerability within the labor market. And so we may ask ourselves, where do we go from here from a research organization? So there's several steps that we aim to pursue as we study this concept of future of work in greater depth. I think first and foremost, we need to operationalize and measure vulnerability within the context of the future of work. And this may enable us to study changes in the future and inform policies that ensure equity. Also, additional research is needed on the diverse challenges and opportunities for specific subgroups in the labor market. And these studies would enable us to determine if there are groups that are more or less likely to experience adverse conditions within the context of this changing work environment. We also need to focus more on intersectionalities. How do people who experience multiple vulnerabilities, including according to their personal identities, fare in the future of work? And given the importance of technology, how might the adoption of specific digital technologies contribute to both advantages or disadvantages for different groups? Indeed, a lot of attention has been placed towards automation and the application of AI, but there are numerous novel technologies that are in the pipeline, and we should understand how they might have unique impacts on different groups of workers. As noted, we did capture a number of weak signals, and these are potential drivers of the future of work whose impact on vulnerable groups is unclear. But additional research is required to examine these potential weak signals in greater depth. And lastly, and most importantly, using the insights we collect, we need to consider how to develop social policies or labor protections for groups experiencing vulnerability in the future of work. And so before I end, I just want to plug a couple upcoming studies for those who might be interested in learning more about this topic or getting more involved in this research as a participant. So in the coming year, we're going to be interviewing a diverse group of policy experts, labor market specialists, and employment service providers to better understand how these trends can actually play out in the field. And so if you're interested, please let us know. We're also going to be conducting a pretty broad Delphi survey on workplace practices, accommodations, and policy supports that are relevant to many of the trends in the future of work that we presented today. And very lastly, we will be conducting interviews with diverse groups of young workers on their thoughts and perceptions on the future of work. So if you're interested in participating, please do contact myself or a member of our research team, and we would be happy to have you participate and bring in your diverse insights into this research program. So I'm going to end there, and I really, truly look forward to your questions, and thank you so much for attending this webinar.
Thank you very much, Arif. So we're going to open up the question and answers. Just a reminder, if you joined a little bit later, if you could type your questions in the question box, I will read them out for Arif. We do have a couple of questions already, so we'll get started, and they're coming in as we speak. Can you, Arif, just talk about how many articles that you reviewed in general and sort of what the time period was for the work that you reviewed?
Yeah, so we reviewed close to 1,600 articles, so quite a bit, and they were reviewed kind of at a more thematic level to extract the aspects of the future of work, how they might or might not impact vulnerability, and we looked at it across a diverse range of trends, so technological, social, political, economic trends, and we conducted the identification of literature, so the search of literature between December of last year and January 2020. And then we redid that process again in August to capture COVID-19 related trends. And we performed the analysis and synthesis of articles over a span of about 4 or 5 months. So pretty much from the spring of 2020 up until the fall of 2020. And then we, as a team, we thought about how we can thematically categorize all the trends that we identified and think about how they could impact vulnerable groups. So definitely a collaborative process and one that involved a lot of steps along the way.
So sorry, did the articles, did you start at 2015 or did you go back to 2000? Sort of how far back did you go?
Okay. Yeah, so we, because the future of work is kind of like a moving target, it's not something that is a static concept. And my colleague Ali, who's been working very closely with me on this project, He calls it like a living process, the Horizon Scan. And so what we decided was we wanted to capture articles that were published at 2015 or onwards, and so more recent trends. And that's because as new technology emerges, as new political changes arise, as new economic crises occur, it totally shifts the way that we're thinking about the labor market and how it's going to impact individual workers. So as a result, we thought that we would just include the most recent articles. And even then, like, I'm sure if we reconducted the scan this week, we probably would find new trends that could be integrated into our analyses. And so this is something that we continue to think about, is how we can update some of this work so that we can reflect current changes.
Okay, thank you. Can you comment on the idea of a universal basic income, given your findings? Does it relate to some of what you've been looking at?
Yeah, so the universal basic income popped up in a number of articles as a potential way to protect workers from displacement that can occur in the future of work. It's often been seen as a policy solution to address the potential impact of automation, as well as growing applications of AI. So certainly it was talked about in a number of studies on potential solutions to vulnerability that can emerge in the future of work. And I think it's a good question, also one in which I think we need to think more about creative solutions, because as more people's working lives are affected by some of these trends in ways that we don't even know yet, I think it's going to require creative solutions. And I think universal basic income is certainly one of those potential solutions to addressing some of the vulnerability that can emerge.
Can you also describe a bit about how you synthesized information from the Twitter posts?
Yeah, so it was a pretty, again, another time-consuming process. So we searched Twitter similar to the way we searched the academic databases, so using the same groups of keywords and search terms. And then what we did was, as you can imagine, there's lots of noise on Twitter. So people put opinions out there, and then people also put high-quality resources. They tweet presentations, they tweet conference abstracts. And so there's actually a lot of high quality research, and a lot of labor market specialists and foresight thinkers are on Twitter. And so we really want to capture some of their thoughts and perspectives in our scan. So what we did was we decided first and foremost that anything that we did use had to have a high level of engagement. And so that means it had to be liked or retweeted at least 5 or more times. Also, each tweet had to include a resource. And this resource had to be from a somewhat reputable source. And it's that resource that we then ultimately synthesize. So it wasn't that we were just synthesizing opinions, we were synthesizing the resources that people were tweeting out.
Okay, and thank you. That answers some of the other questions as well. By the way, lots of compliments coming in. A specific question for you about future changes, and what they might mean for accessible transportation services, and how a lack of transportation can negatively, of course, affect persons with disabilities to find and keep and advance employment. Can you speak to this?
Yeah, so that theme didn't emerge as much as we would expect. I think one theme that related to that concept was with regards to like self-driving cars, which often leverage a lot of AI technologies. And I think the self-driving cars, it might be one route to accessible transportation where people with mobility or visual impairments or sensory impairments might be better able to transport themselves from one place to another using self-driving cars. But in terms of like accessible transportation, I don't know if that emerged beyond the concept of a self-driving car as being a way to get around. But I do feel that with the current changes to the structure of work as a result of COVID-19 and the growth in virtual collaboration softwares, I think many workers in some of the articles that we had reviewed talked a lot about the openness of virtual collaboration is really creating an opportunity for them to better engage in the labor market. But again, I think it's important to note that even with like the concept of self-driving cars as well as virtual collaboration softwares, it's not available to all people. And that seemed to be like a common discourse that while these technologies exist and they are definitely going to improve people's working lives, that doesn't mean that everyone's going to get access to it. And so I think that also raises another policy concern or another policy question that we need to think about, is how to make these technologies more accessible to all.
Okay, thank you. And the person who is asking that question is actually doing her PhD in the area of accessible transportation. And so she's interested in, I think, following up with you further.
Yeah, I would be interested to hear more about their thoughts. They're the experts in this concept, so definitely.
Another question, thanks for the presentation. Are there policies that can mitigate trends toward populism and the potential impact on vulnerable workers? Did you see any of this? Obviously, this is something that is changing quickly.
Yeah, so I think first and foremost, I think maybe we should disclose to the audience is that I'm not like a political scientist. I'm not like a technologist. So a lot of these themes that we kind of that emerged from our synthesis of literature were ones that we were kind of unfamiliar with ourselves going into this process. So I don't know if I can provide the level of depth that maybe the person who's asking the question has asked, but yeah, I actually don't know if I can answer that question. I think it's certainly a concern in many contexts that emerged, and I think the relationship between technology and populism was one that was really interesting to our group. The fact that there was a study actually that was conducted at U of T that found that people who perceived that AI technologies would affect their working lives were also more likely to report having populist perspectives. And so clearly there's this requirement to understand like what impact is technology having on our thoughts and perceptions regarding the future, and how is that perspective then impacting our political perspectives and our inclusion within the work environment and the types of policies that we're implementing that make work more or less accessible. So I don't know if I have a clear answer to that specific question, but one that maybe we need to look into a little bit more.
Okay, thank you. A couple of related questions. One of the listeners asked about Trend 9 and where you discussed some of the skills that would be required. Was there additional information from the research that indicated any other general skills that might be important in the future? And another person asks actually for a bit of a summary of the kinds of job opportunities that you identified.
Yeah, so I guess I could probably do a whole presentation on like job skills and skills of the future, and that's been a pretty big policy direction and programmatic direction from the federal government as well. And I think that's important to highlight. There's the Future Skills Center based in Toronto, but is doing national initiatives to understand what skills are needed and where are some skills gaps and ways in which we can bridge the gap between what employers need and what workers currently possess. So I think that's important to note that there's a huge amount of specialization and understanding of what workers need. I think in terms of like some of the like most common skills that we heard about a lot, obviously like the technological competencies were a significant aspect of the job skills that are required for the future of work. But I think it's not just about the technology. What we heard or what we saw in a lot of the research that we synthesized was the importance of collaboration, teamwork, empathy, diversity, being able to work with different types of people. I think that tended to be a set of skills that will be really challenging to automate or for technology to replace. And it's a very uniquely human skill that a lot of workers can actually apply to a work environment and have unique contributions. So I think those would be some of the more specific job skills that I think were talked about quite a bit. And then in terms of specific jobs that were emerging in the future of work, like it's off the top of my head, I'm kind of blanking on the specific jobs that were emerging, but I think what we heard quite a bit were jobs that were kind of seeing a decline, right? So a lot of jobs in like customer service can be automated now. A lot of jobs in like grocery stores can be automated now, and this automation is being facilitated by the COVID-19 pandemic, where it's safer to have a machine operate or facilitate self-checkout rather than a person doing that. At the same time, growth in jobs in like healthcare, which require one-on-one interaction, those jobs can't be automated. Teaching, that's another example of a job that can't be automated because it involves one-on-one relationships and empathy and teamwork. And so again, there's a big literature on this, and if the questioner wants to send me an email, I can maybe point them into some of the research on the jobs of the future, which there is quite a bit of research on that topic.
Okay, I will answer the next question. One of our attendees is asking, will the slides be available? And yes, they will. So they will be put up on our website for you to check back in later.
Yeah.
Another person is saying, great presentation, wondering if you could speak to the disadvantage or advantages in particular that immigrant newcomer workers might face trying to enter the workforce and sustain work, given some of the trends you talked about.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And I think that we purposely didn't want to focus on specific groups of workers that would be disadvantaged because one, there's not a clear-cut evidence base from what the research we identified suggesting that certain groups will be more or less likely to be disadvantaged. But I think with regards to the immigrant workers, I think when you're entering the labor market in jobs that are low skilled, they might require less educational attainment. These are the types of jobs that we're seeing that could be most likely to be replaced by technology. Also, these are jobs where there could be more precarious, and as a result, they may be also more likely to be offshored or outsourced to workers in other countries. And so clearly there's this kind of relationship between the conditions in which immigrants might be moving into and the impact of some of these trends. And so I think they could be one group that may be specifically disadvantaged in the future of work amongst numerous other groups. So yeah, certainly that is a group to be concerned about.
Someone is asking, you mentioned a large number of articles that you reviewed. How many of these articles were based on survey data?
Yeah.
Do you have a sense?
I don't have a sense of that specific number, but what I can say is that we kind of got a mix of evidence sources. So I think there was a lot of economics data which looked at more larger labor force analyses. So a lot of research in the United States and some in Canada, which talks about the impact of automation and machine learning and AI on specific jobs. These are projections of how things could be displaced in the future. We also saw a lot of think pieces of major international organizations who used case studies to identify potential impacts and how things could unfold in the future. And then we also had researchers in the fields of strategic foresight who utilized what I called weak signals, and they projected outwards to say, okay, well, if we were to utilize specific methodologies of insight development, these could be potential changes that emerge. And so we also integrated that into our insights. And so definitely a range of different evidence sources went into our scan.
Okay, thank you. Someone has commented that one of the trends of the future of work that has got a fair bit of attention, I think, in the past has been population aging. With an aging population and people retiring, we may have an increase of labor and skill shortages. We haven't heard much about this in the last year with COVID-19 and with high unemployment. Do you think population aging is still an important issue that needs to be addressed?
Yeah, and so I think what's important to note is that our study focused on medium to long-term trends. So these are trends that are going to emerge within the 10 to 15-year time horizon. I think the aging population is a topic that we're currently experiencing right now or have experienced in the past with regards to labor shortages. So it wasn't one that we included in this specific scan, but I do believe that it has a number of implications for skill shortages. And I think what's also important to note is that we didn't get into this so far because we just didn't have time in this presentation, but the fact that kind of aligning with the retirement of many baby boomers is the increase in the Gen Z workers and their perspectives that they're going to bring into work. And so that theme kind of emerged with regards to the growth in the Gen Z population. But yeah, you're right, in terms of sheer numbers and meeting job requirements, the aging population will certainly impact our current work and where we see ourselves in the short term.
Okay, there aren't too many questions left. With some comments though, and a bit of a question. Again, thanks for the great presentation. There were some comments about the rapid changes already that we're seeing that have possibly been driven by COVID. So for example, we're seeing an awful lot of online shopping, which increases demands for workers in warehousing work, for example. And that perhaps these workers might benefit from good use of technology and automation and things like that. And education centers are also being automated. And so do you think we're going to see some rapid changes in some industries that have maybe been lacking behind in some of these trends?
Yeah, that's pretty much the theme that emerged from our synthesis of that specific trend, is that when we see a period of external shock, it totally disrupts a number of industries in the way we do work. Like, I think many of us can probably find examples within our own working lives where we're now using technology that we hadn't used in the past. And I think it exists within all fields and all industries. And I'm happy to point the person who asked that question to some more specific literature talking about this relationship. But I think if you kind of go into some of these jobs reports or World Economic Forum reports, their surveys of employers suggest that there's a significant amount of investment in different digital technologies to address some of the changes that we've experienced, and the fact that now we're in an environment that is more socially distanced, that is even more likely for people to shop online, to work online, to interact with each other online. And that creates a whole new set of opportunities and ways in which we work. But then it also creates disadvantages for those who maybe have to then fulfill orders at a manufacturing facility, or have to then work to make sure that food is delivered that is ordered on a digital platform. And so for every kind of innovation, there's also going to be aspects that disadvantage someone, and we need to figure out how to protect those specific workers.
Okay. As you know, another person is saying, there have been a lot of changes to work in the last 100 years. Is there something, now we have a word for this, the future work, future proofing and these other terms, but is there something different about the current period of change in work?
Yeah.
Or is this really just an example of how work changes all the time?
Yeah, and so I think that's a really good question. And I think what the literature will say is that the pace of change and the magnitude of change is occurring at a far greater rate than any other period of industrial change. And so I don't know the exact number, but it's far outpacing changes that occurred during the Industrial Revolution or the application of computers in the early 90s. And so I think what makes this point in time different is that the technology is way more advanced, it's way more integrated, and it's being applied at a far quicker rate than it would be in past periods of time. And then if you add on like climate change, if you add on climate change, which is going to disrupt the way we live, that's also a significant change that did not exist or hadn't existed in its current manifestation like 30 years ago, right? So I think there's also other kind of like significant changes that are adding to the role of technology.
Okay, thank you. One more question here. Someone has asked about how the future of digitization may impact migration to smaller communities that could potentially increase the health, actually, of smaller and more localized economies if we are able to do, I guess, more of this remote working.
Yeah, and I think that's a really interesting point. I don't know if that emerged within the documents that we had synthesized, but I think it's playing out in front of our eyes, where a lot of people, like I live in downtown Toronto, and I know a lot of people have moved out to into the suburbs and more rural communities just to get away from the potential exposure to people. Or so yeah, certainly I think while the migration, like within Canada, migration to rural settings can obviously have some benefits for those local communities, increase economies at the local level. I think at the same time, a lot of the technologies that are enabling people to leave the city and work remotely, they also kind of create a level of susceptibility to the same types of jobs now being moved to other countries where labor could be cheaper and where the same type of work can be performed at a high level. And so while there's obviously local benefits at the economic, in terms of economics, there's also susceptibility again to displacement from workers in other countries. So again, there's pros and cons to everything, and that's kind of the point of this presentation, is to identify that for every kind of change that's occurring, there's both benefits and challenges.
Right, and in fact, another person in the audience has identified that this urban-rural divide. Right now, we have issues related to reliable internet access and technology in general in some of the rural areas. And so while it may, you may see migration, there are these challenges that need to be overcome. Do you have any additional comments on that?
No, I guess it just goes back to that theme, like there's going to be challenges and opportunities. And some individuals will be able to take advantage of these opportunities, whereas others are going to be excluded. And how do we understand in what ways certain groups are going to be excluded from these opportunities, and what ways can we utilize research to provide opportunities so that those who are excluded can take advantage of some of these opportunities, right? And so obviously there's examples like skills training, making that more accessible to people is one, but as the person who asked the question noted, just having better access to internet and technology is another fundamental opportunity to increase access to these changes.
Right. Another question has come up. We only have a couple more. Restricting the search to documents and tweets in the English language might have resulted in some biases. For example, there would be a lot in Hindi or Mandarin where you have very different types of work where there's still sweatshops, and that might change the perspective. Do you have any comments about that?
Yeah, no, I think that's a really great point. Like obviously this topic is quite broad, and we purposely took a broad perspective to understanding elements of the future of work. But one way we did kind of like add a little precision to the search to address our specific research questions was to focus on industrialized contexts, like OECD contexts. So these are more high income countries. And so I think because of that, restricting it to English I don't think affected the results in the ways that we might think. And so I do think if we were to conduct this research focusing more on middle income countries or less developed countries, I think the findings could also be quite different as well. And so as the person who's asking the question notes, I think, if we were to focus in on other contexts, the ways in which technology might benefit someone in downtown Toronto might also disadvantage another person who's manufacturing in another country. And so, I think that's a good point, and one I think maybe well suited for future research.
Okay. I want to note, Arif, that we've had a lot of people thanking you for your presentation and who are interested in getting involved. Or having you present perhaps to other groups. And so I'll just say, you know who you are in the audience, rather than identifying everyone. Perhaps I'll ask you to contact Arif directly, and because I know you're very interested in helping out in any way you can, Arif. I don't see any other questions, so maybe a last chance for any other questions from anyone. Okay. Well, Arif, thank you so much. As you can see, you really engaged the audience with the presentation, and I know everyone would like to find out more as you go along. You mentioned at the beginning that you're translating this work that you've done on the review to new research that you're undertaking, and so I know that we'll want to hear more about that as we go on.
Yeah, there's a bunch of research in the pipeline, so definitely stay tuned.
And if I missed any questions, my apologies. Again, please do email Arif, and please look out for our next speaker series. We will be sending out reminders. If you haven't already signed up for our newsletter, it's a great way to keep in touch with everything that we're doing. And I wish you all a good day, and thank you again so much, Arif. That was really terrific.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for attending, and I hope you all have a great day.